Hello, everyone. This is the DLS Academy, and this lecture will be about the immune system, about the basic topics of innate and adaptive immune system. I believe this basic information should hopefully help you as we go through some more challenging aspects of immunology in future, and obviously it will help you with your medical exam, whether it's a USMLE, AMC, or PLEF. So let's go. So, when you think about the immune response, most individuals gonna say, hey, the immune response is just about the body discerning between self and non-self. Well, we really want you though to keep that in mind, but sort of expand your view of the immune response. And what we want to actually you to see is that immune response really recognizes multiple things, not just self from non-self. It typically is thought of as dealing with disease cells, but what about the cells that are damaged or distressed or dying? All of those cells are also addressed by the immune response and are going to be eliminated. When we think about the immune system, we always gonna talk about them to be divided onto two complementary arms, the innate and adaptive. Here we need to stress that these two arms are not mutually exclusive from one another, but rather provide each other with necessary signals to clear an infection. So the innate immune response is going to provide us with the first line of defense against a variety of pathogens. There are going to be several barriers that are going to comprise the innate immune response. First, and probably what I think is the most important, is the simple anatomic barrier that is presented by the skin and mucosa. Once that though is compromised, we are going to have a couple of really good backup plans, including some aspects of physiological aspects of defense, then it's a complement, which is a humoral aspect, and of course the cellular aspect, which includes phagocytes and granulocytes. And when you're out of all of those things together, really what you're looking in is that having the presentation of inflammation. And inflammation really is critical for the clearance of infection. The characteristics of innate immune response are both reflective of its strength as well as its limitations. Well, as the strength, it's always on. The term present intrinsically is going to say, hey, I'm here, I'm ready to go, just activate me, which is going to be very important when you need to immediately respond to infection. But here are some of the limitations. First of all, it's a limited specificity. It's only capable of recognizing shared patterns of structures among the different pathogens. And due to this limited specificity, you are going to also see limited diversity, as these cells also have a limited number of receptors that can recognize their different patterns. The other thing that really puts innate immunity at a disadvantage over the adaptive immune response is that there is no memory. So every time the innate immune response sees the pathogen, it is going to respond with the same amount of vigor as it did initially. The second arm. The second arm of immune response is adaptive immunity, and it is comprised of two types of cells. So it's a B and T lymphocytes and their respective effector activities. Those cells, they have several characteristics that differentiate them from cells of innate immune response. Each cell is specific. So as you look at the population, what you have to recognize is that populations of cells, they show extreme diversity. Another important aspect is that the response is heightened with every single exposure to the pathogen. So the response you have the second or the third time to the same pathogen is much more robust than the initial one. And this is based on the fact that each response generates a certain number of memory cells that exist long enough to deal with the secondary or subsequent responses. Also very important is that B and T cells are able to distinguish between self and non-self. Well, is it so? We all know that it's not 100% correct. Otherwise, we would never see an autoimmune disease. But we are going to talk about this a bit later. So, the minute you turn on an adaptive immune response, it is trying to turn itself off due to a very high level of proliferation associated with its activation. On this slide, you can see the table, and this table is great for comparing and contrasting both characteristics and components of innate and adaptive immune responses. And I would definitely recommend you to memorize this table as it is critical for your step 1 of the medical exam. Critically, innate and adaptive immune system, they come together to help eliminate infection. They don't live separately. However, sometimes once a pathogen is capable of breaking anatomic and physiological barriers, the innate immune system response is fast enough to sometimes even contain the infection and eliminate the infection by itself, and really sort of eliminating the need for adaptive immunity to be switched on. So innate immunity is the front line of the human body. Obviously, we are here because sometimes the innate immune response is not capable, and in fact, more often, the innate immune response is not capable of handling a pathogen completely by itself, and therefore, we need the help of that specific response, which comes by way of adaptive immunity. But here's the issue. It takes about 1 to 2 weeks after the primary infection for the adaptive immune response to really become activated and to really help clear the antigen by way of effector cells and antibodies and all kind of stuff that we're about to talk later in this series of immunology lectures. Another thing that is also critical to understand about the immune system, and of course remember that we have the whole system that is designed to kill things and sometimes to draw a line between self and non-self. So there is a lot of control mechanisms that the immune system has in order to turn itself off. So it is what we call self-limiting. Once we have an infection, and that infection has been cleared both innate and adaptive immunity, they must turn themselves off. Now, as far as adaptive immunity, we have antibodies and residual cells like T and B cells that provide immunity, and then we have these long-lasting memory cells that really survey the body looking for that same antigen again and again to protect us from subsequent infections. Here's the key point with the same pathogen. Remember, the immune response is highly specific. Now, the timeline of the immune response, and you will see this graph many times, and it's very critical to memorize it as you are preparing for your medical exam. With this particular timeline, we are looking into acute response to infection. As we look into it, remember, once we have a pathogen which gets into the system, it's going to be the innate immune response that is going to be immediately activated. So again, the innate immune response is going to be the first employed arm of the immune response. Typically, the innate immune response is going to be able to contain and eliminate a pathogen by its own. But in the cases where the pathogen is going to increase its numbers to a certain threshold, where the innate immune response is no longer able to contain the infection, then the adaptive immune response is going to be engaged. So, it's critical to understand that it is the innate immune response, collaborative effort with the adaptive immune response, that will activate B and T cells. A very important time frame that I'm going to ask you to remember is that it takes approximately 1 to 2 weeks to get a full-blown adaptive immune responsive versus immediacy of the innate immune response. So, after the infection is being cleared, you have to consider that all the cells that were generated are going to be either undergo apoptosis, or the ones that survive will be reflective of the memory cells. And those memory cells are going to go on to respond to a secondary and subsequent infection with the same pathogen. Thank you for listening. This was the first lecture in our immunology series. The new lecture is coming soon, so please subscribe and be ready for your exam. And in the next lecture, we are going to discuss another high yield immunology topics. Thank you.